and I'm going to get started here again. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Arc of Indiana and Self-Advocates of Indiana virtual conference. We're going to wait a few minutes to fully get started while people get out of the waiting room and join us here at the workshop.
So we'll go with that. So today I'm going to cover some basics on decision making, then we'll focus on options that are available to adults to assist with decision making, specifically spending some time on supported decision making. For those of you playing a drinking game at home, every time I say decision making and you drink, it's going to be a very fun and long afternoon for you, I'm afraid. So then we'll talk about how to support someone to determine what option might be the best. And I'll give an example using my friend Jamie Beck. And then finally, we'll end with how you can help make sure people are receiving the help that they need in that least restrictive manner possible. So let's start out really simple, right? We've all made decisions. In fact, we make hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions every day. What to eat, what to wear, whether to answer a snarky email with an equally snarky email. And the decisions that we make really range in their complexity and the time and the mental resources that we use to make them. For example, the time and energy that it takes for you to decide what to eat for breakfast is much different than the time it takes to make a bigger decision like where to live. But regardless of the type of decision we make, the process is still the same. It involves understanding the issue, determining the options and consequences, gathering information, evaluating those options and consequences, deciding on a course of action, communicating or implementing that choice, and then experiencing or observing the outcomes of that choice. Now, sometimes this process is instantaneous and we don't even realize we're doing it, like with deciding what to wear. Other times, we're much more deliberative. We talk to friends and family. We talk to trusted professionals. We read Amazon product reviews. We do whatever is needed in order for us to feel comfortable in making an informed choice. And we're empowered to make those choices and have our decisions respected. And this is part of self-determination in the natural human experience. Now, we have all had experiences, even as adults, where someone has made a choice for us. For example, you want Mexican for dinner, but your partner orders Chinese. Even those small choices, when we feel like we haven't been heard or that our choice hasn't been respected, can make us feel really frustrated. So think about the big decisions in your life, what job you have, where you live, how to spend your free time, and imagine how it might feel to not be able to make choices about those important areas of your life, to not have input. And that's the context that we're really talking about today. So how do you like to make decisions? There are so many different categories of decision-making styles, and you'll find that there may be one or two that really speak to you and how you like to make decisions, and those might be kind of your default decision-making styles, but you can use different strategies in different contexts. So let's talk about some common decision-making styles. So there's the analytical. There's, the people who like to make the pro-con lists. They use logic and data to inform their decisions. And then there's the intuitive folks, the folks that go by their gut feeling or spontaneous thoughts on how they're going to make their decision. Information seeking. What do the experts say? What do product reviews say? What do articles say about what is the best course of action? And then there's consensus seeking, asking friends and family, polling your coworkers. And then passive. The universe will guide you to the right decision, or, if all else fails, if you delay long enough, a decision will kind of be made for you. And if all else fails, you can always go with the minion style, which is just flipping a coin or using eeny, meeny, miny, moe. There's all kinds of options out there. So what we're really talking about with decision-making is self-determination, right? So self-determination is the ability to have control and direction over your life. So think for a minute, why is self-determination important to you? Because guess what? Those same reasons why it's important to you are the same reasons why it's important to people with disabilities and all people and older adults experiencing conditions of aging. It's the bedrock of what makes us human. And we should really try to help support and encourage someone's self-determination as much as possible. And there is a growing body of research about the benefits of supporting self-determination. For example, people with more reported self-determination have been shown to be correlated with improved psychological health, better adjustment, better quality of life, more employment and community integration, increased health, welfare, and safety. On the other hand, a lack of self-determination or a lack of having input or being able to have control over your life has been correlated with some negative effects. Low self-esteem, feelings of inadequacy. They can experience significant negative impact on both physical and mental health. So, and I can't see anybody raising hands, but everybody I'm sure has been in a situation where we have either had said about us, or we have been said to, or we have even said, once the child turns 18, or once you turn 18, or once the student turns 18, you'll have to get guardianship or else you won't be able to participate in their education decisions. It happens a lot. There is a very real school to guardianship pipeline, but with very limited exceptions. There are no services or supports or benefits that require someone to be under guardianship in order to access them. And I want to make sure everyone is aware that there are options other than guardianship that still allow important people to participate in a loved one's care. So we want to focus on some of those less intrusive options so that we can preserve self-determination to the greatest extent possible, right? So our goal here is just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate, make decisions about their life, and in the least restrictive manner possible. And for many of you, those concepts are not unfamiliar. And I want to talk briefly about this issue of capacity, because as an attorney, there are different legal standards for capacity: capacity to consent, capacity to contract, capacity to sign a power of attorney document. And it's important to note that capacity really exists on a spectrum. Whether or not someone has capacity is determined by the situation, the complexity of the issues, as well as internal and external factors: time of day, their physiological state, whether they're currently experiencing symptoms or not. For anyone who's ever gone to the grocery store shopping while hungry, you understand that you make much different choices than you do when you're not hungry. As someone who has eaten cake for dinner before, this is an actual phenomenon that happens. Timing of the day might also be important. There are people who, I've heard they exist, are morning people. For those people, answering questions in the morning or making big decisions in the morning is going to be much better than asking them at night. And it also relates to their person. Alertness may change based on when and what type of medication that they've taken. Their medication may make them more alert. Their medication may make them drowsy. How much sleep they had the night before. And again, whether or not they're experiencing active symptoms. Capacity can also change over time based on skill acquisition. The more you learn or practice a particular skill, the better you are at it. And that same thing is true for decision making. The more opportunities you have to practice making decisions, the better you get at it. The more you identify those decision making styles that work for you. And here's kind of an example. So I have a driver's license. So this means the state of Indiana has said that I have the basic capacity to drive a car. In order to demonstrate that capacity, I didn't need to prove that I knew everything about how a car worked. I didn't need to drive like Danica Patrick around the 500. I just needed to meet those minimum requirements to show that I could drive and do so safely. Now, my driving skills for the most part have gotten better since they were at 16, right? I have practiced and done this for many years now. And there's also been advances in technology that's made it easier and safer to drive. But my capacity to drive still fluctuates. Driving late at night, in bad weather, with my kids screaming in the back seat, is much different than driving on a clear day. I'm going to Target, Beyonce's on the radio, and I'm living my best life, right? But the state of Indiana hasn't put restrictions on my ability to drive. They haven't said you can only drive when you're not distracted on clear days. And they also haven't said, you need to rebuild a transmission and know every single part about how an engine works in order to be able to drive. It's understood that I can seek help or assistance when those issues come up that are outside of my wheelhouse. I can consult a mechanic. I can talk to my friends. I can have somebody else drive me. And the same, unfortunately, isn't always true for decision-making. Oftentimes, people with disabilities have to prove that they can make decisions covering a wide variety of areas and complexity at all times and under many different circumstances in order to maintain their ability to make decisions independently. And oftentimes their decision-making ability is questioned or removed if they make a mistake or if they have a decision that ends up turning out badly. And that point is, when we talk about capacity, we really need to think of it as a spectrum, not a yes or a no. And we need to keep in mind all of these different factors that go into a determination of whether someone has quote unquote capacity. So let's talk about some different options for how we can help support people. Keep in mind that a lot of these tools can be used in combination. They can change over time to really individualize the supports based on the person's needs and strengths. I apologize, the way that Google's, switching over to Google Drives, it appears to have switched up the formatting for this. So there are copies of this on our website if you want to see what they are, but the text is there, just not the color coding in the formatting. So I apologize for that. So for those of you who are visual learners, this is what I call the spectrum of assistance, going from least restrictive at the top to most restrictive at the bottom. The things in the top category are things that can be done informally or formally, just however the person needs. The things in the second category are things that you should really consult with an attorney about. And then that final category are things that require court involvement. So again, I apologize for the formatting, but this type of handout is also available on our website if you would like to see. So let's talk about interdependence, technology, starting with the least restrictive, informal supports. These are ways to help fill the gaps in someone's needs. For example, someone who has a hard time remembering to pay bills, you can help them set up automatic bill pay or use credit cards with low limits, gift cards, for those who might need help with budgeting, using apps, smart medication dispensers, prepackaged medication, grocery delivery. There's all kinds of services that have cropped up, especially during the pandemic, to help support people who are living at home. Creativity is really key. It can be anything that can be done with minimal involvement or intrusion into someone's life to help support them. Here's kind of an example. So my friend Jamie moved from Richmond to Muncie, and she had to learn how to navigate public transportation. Instead of putting in her service plan, you know, Jamie will memorize the bus schedule with 80% accuracy over a 2-week period. She learned how to navigate around Muncie using Pokemon Go. That's how she learned the streets and where everything was located, and that's something that really worked for her. It didn't cost any money. It was just, you know, using an app in her own interests. So some other specific examples or thoughts on ways that people could get some of that informal support. Like I mentioned, for finances, there's automatic bill pay, there's direct deposit, there's specialized credit cards that will either restrict the amount of spending or the amount of spending in a certain store or within a certain period. There's joint bank accounts, although I would caution that with joint bank accounts, both people who are on the account have equal access and authority over those funds. So you want to make sure that whoever has that joint bank account is a trusted person. There's statement sharing, where you can have the monthly financial statements shared with somebody else. There's all kinds of budgeting tools, both apps and paper-based, all kinds of ways. There's also financial planners and financial advisors. When we talk about independent living, there's grocery and meal delivery services. There's mail assistance. So for example, you can sign up where your mail will get delivered to a third party. They will open it. They will discard the junk mail, and they will scan and email the important mail that you need to pay attention to. This can help for people who maybe get bogged down with figuring out what's important, what's not. It can also help, when mail is delivered and it needs to be easily shared with somebody else who may be supporting them from far away. There's smart home technology that allow people to lock and unlock doors remotely, garage doors. There's even, a smart fridge that will help you know when to reorder certain foods. There's calendars, phone apps, friends and family. It doesn't have to be, anything super formal all the time. For healthcare, there's medication packaging and delivery so that people don't have to dispense it. They can just rip off the packet and take their next day's pills. There's smart medication dispensers. There's healthcare tracking apps and journals that you can share with other folks. There's HIPAA releases that will allow other people to have access to your medical records so that they can be aware of what's going on. In the area of education, there's planners, both electronic and hard copy, to help people stay organized. Tutors, there's peer model groups. Taking those strategies that worked in school and translating them into post-school life. The formatting works on this one, so here you go. Next, we're going to work at this yellow category, which are things that may need a professional to help draft or review. So when we talk about less restrictive alternatives, I want to cue you briefly to that change in Indiana law from 2018 that added this definition of less restrictive alternatives within the guardianship code. And so what it means is an approach to meeting a person's needs that restrict fewer rights of the person than would the appointment of the guardian. And it includes, but is not limited to, things like supportive decision-making agreements, which we'll talk about here in a second, technological assistance, representative payee, healthcare representative, power of attorney, all kinds of things that are less than a full guardianship. So when we talk about supported decision-making, part of that law that was passed in 2018 includes a definition of supported decision-making. And what that means is a process of supporting and accommodating an adult through that decision-making process to make, communicate, and effectuate life decisions without impeding the self-determination of an adult, right? What lawyer came up with that? It's very wordy, yeah. So this definition is really based off of similar definitions that are used by the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making, as well as other states. But what it means in plain language is, in its most basic understanding, supported decision-making is a way to accommodate that decision-making process that we talked about earlier. So in supported decision-making, people who need support choose appropriately named supporters. These are generally trusted friends, family members, caregivers, to help them through that decision-making process that we talked about. And they can do this in the areas of their life that they've identified in a way that they want that help to be given in that decision-making style that best suits them. So with supported decision-making, the person has all decision-making authority. They make the ultimate decision, but they get support in that process along the way, right? But they ultimately make that decision. It's a way to increase empowerment. It's a way to assert self-determination for those who may need some assistance with that process. The formalization of it generally means writing down that person's plan into a document called a supported decision-making agreement, which we'll touch on here in a moment. These arrangements can be changed as needed. They don't require a court to get involved. And here's kind of an example of how supported decision-making works. So the other day, my husband let me know that he and some other dads from the neighborhood were gonna start a bike gang. Like bicycles, not motorcycles. So they're not that cool. It's like the most suburban dad thing you can do. And so he asked me, should I wear a helmet when we go out for our rides? And my immediate mom response was, yeah. The risk of a traumatic brain injury compared to not looking cool is, no pun intended, a no-brainer, right? We talked about pros and cons, potential consequences, all the I told you so's I would give him if he fell and hurt himself. But ultimately, he made the choice to not wear a helmet. It's not the safest choice. It's not the choice I would have made, but it was his choice nonetheless. But as adults, we get to make decisions, even bad decisions, all the time, and those decisions are respected. And the process that he went through is an example of supported decision-making. He used me as a supporter. And that's the cool thing about supported decision-making. Informally, it's what a lot of us do already. It's how most of us make major and sometimes even minor decisions. Now, riding a bike without a helmet is not the same as whether to get a potentially life-saving medical treatment, but no matter what that decision is, or how much support the person needs, or the type of support they need, it is so much better to support them, to help them make the decision themselves, instead of making that decision for them, right? So people often ask me for examples of the types of supports or accommodations that someone can have. And this is really difficult because it can be anything. And it can be so individualized and personal. But to give you some examples so that you can start to see what's going on, I wanted to break that down using that decision-making process that we talked about. So when we think about, needing to understand the issue, we're not all doctors, we're not all mechanics, we're not all bankers. So when we're presented with really complex information, sometimes it can be very hard to even understand what it is that we're talking about. So help me understand in plain English what I'm looking at, what I'm supposed to be deciding, what the issue really means. Determining those options and consequences. Help me see the big picture. How does this decision fit into my overall life goals? How does this decision, what are the likely consequences that can happen from this? Gathering information. So help me write out what questions I need to ask. Help me figure out what are good sources of information as I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. Evaluating those options. Help me make a pro-con list. Help me express my values. When we're talking about making a choice, help me get unstuck. There's been research to suggest that when presented with having to make a decision in the moment, oftentimes people with schizophrenia or autism spectrum disorders report feeling stuck and unable to make a decision when they're forced to make a decision rather quickly. So their supporter could recognize that or help support that and give them the ability to have more time and space to make those decisions without feeling so constrained. Communicating or implementing choice. So help me express my choice. And I put in an asterisk by this because if somebody is asking their supporter to help enforce that choice while that person is not there, you may need another document like a power of attorney or something like that that would authorize the supporter to make that decision or communicate that decision on the person's behalf. But especially for people who have problems communicating or addressing authority, if my supporter is there with me, help me share my voice, help me raise my voice up so that I can speak about what I want my decision to be. Help me understand what I need to do next. So I've made this choice. Now what do I do? What supports do I need? What services might I need to ask? How do I communicate my choice? And then observing those results. So supporting the choice I've made, because nothing is worse than going through that process and making the decision and not being supported in the choice that you've made. We have, every single one of us on the face of the planet have made mistakes. We have made poor choices. We have made stupid choices. We have made wrong choices. But we have been given the grace and flexibility to learn from those choices and move on. And everybody should be given that same flexibility, that same dignity of risk. So who can use supported decision-making? And the short answer is really anyone can use the principles of supported decision-making. What I showed you earlier with that example with my husband is that this is how a lot of us already make decisions. And the concept of supported decision-making, it can be used by anyone to even maximize participation, even for someone currently under guardianship. And while the concept really started with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it can be used for any disability or condition, including those with mental health issues, those recovering from addictions, those with conditions of aging. It's really just a process of supporting and accommodating that decision-making process. So another question that I get frequently is, oh, I know someone who this would be great for, but he doesn't have any family, doesn't have any people in his life. So let's talk about how to support people who are quote unquote without supporters. So it might take some creativity. If the person doesn't have people readily identifiable that they want to serve in the role of supporter, and again, they are the ones who choose their supporters, the people with disabilities are. So helping them think creatively about former service providers, parents of good friends, former teachers, neighbors. There's some really cool research being done in Alaska with peer-based decision-making and crowdsourced decision-making, where their peers, through an app, I type a question of, should I buy a new TV? And my peer group said, well, do you have enough budget? Have you saved up enough money? Do you need it? And they kind of, help the person process decision-making that way as well. And also looking for meaningful opportunities for the person to develop those relationships. Does the person, do you like to bowl? Joining a regular, a bowling league. Do you like reading? Joining a book club at the library. So you can build these relationships outside of the normal service provider context with real meaningful community-based relationships. And finally, there may be a need to use other options that provide a little more structure while the person is gaining those skills and making those relationships. So we've talked a lot about how that concept of supported decision-making is what we inherently do anyway when we're making decisions. So, if you're deciding what kind of car to buy, do you write down, oh, I'm going to talk to my brother, I'm going to consult with Kelley Blue Book, I'm going to visit these 3 dealerships? Probably not. You probably just have in your head what you're going to do and you go forth and do it. But for those who need some additional support, or those who need that structure, or those who want to make sure that their supporters know how they want that support to be given, having it written down and having that structure in place might be a very good needed tool. And so that's what supported decision-making agreements are for. They not only provide a reference point for the person who needs support, yes, these are the areas that I want support, this is how I can do it, this is who I can call on, but it also provides structure to the supporter so that they know exactly how and when the person might be seeking their assistance. And it can also, most importantly, be used to show third parties like doctors, service providers, bankers, who might be questioning the person's ability to make decisions, that they are in fact able to make their own decisions and have those decisions be recognized, even if they're using accommodations in that decision-making process. So for those options where we see, the doctor saying, well, I'm not sure they have the capacity to consent to this treatment, you can show the doctor this supported decision-making agreement, and this is how I came to my decision, and hopefully the doctor can use that to say, okay, I see now that the person has made that decision, and we can move forward with going forward with treatment. And the new law in Indiana now has legal recognition for supported decision-making agreements. And I won't read the entire statute for you, but there are some things that I want to highlight. You've got to have 1 or more supporters. The supporters are over the age of 18. The supported decision-making agreement must be entered into voluntarily. The person must understand the nature and effect of the agreement, basically what it does and doesn't do, who their supporters are. The person can still have control over their decision-making even if they need support to do so. They can change or modify their agreement. They can also choose not to use it if they don't want to. They don't have to use it in every decision-making context. The person can, if the person has a guardian and they want to use supported decision-making, the guardian can consent in writing to the person being able to use that. That's a great way for people to practice skill development so that maybe guardianship won't be needed over time. The supporter has a relationship of what's called trust and confidence. They are not fiduciaries, and not to get too into the legal weeds, but it's a legal definition that defines how somebody may or may not be held accountable. And so supporters can't be paid for their services for serving as a supporter. Paid staff are able to serve as a supporter if that person wants, but the best practice is to have them serve as a supporter, maybe in areas other than the services that they provide, to avoid any possible conflict of interest. The supporter is not able to access information about that person without their consent. So if they sign a FERPA authorization or a HIPAA authorization that would allow them access, banks might also need additional paperwork to allow someone access to information. There is To get rid of a supported decision making, the person would just do that in writing to each of the named supporter. It terminates when the person using the document dies, or if they revoke the agreement, or if all named supporters withdraw without any successor supporters being appointed, or if the court determines that a person doesn't have capacity to use supported decision-making agreements. So there is what's called third-party protection for relying on or declining to honor supported decision-making agreement. That's similar to the way that a power of attorney works. And it also provides protection from liability for supporters, except in the cases of fraud, misrepresentation, reckless or willful or wanton misconduct. So in general, if a supporter helps the person through the decision-making process, the person makes a decision that has consequences that they're not happy with, there would be a defense if they tried to go after the supporter for their role in that decision-making process, unless there was, fraud. There is no special form needed. However, there are some common components of the form. We have a form available on our website for people to take a look at if they would like to use it. They're free to download that and look at that as well. So you want to make sure that it includes information about how that relationship will work, identification of the supporters or the areas of the person's life where that support is needed, and the manner by which that support should be provided. There should also be reference to any other decision-making arrangements or supports that the person has. For example, if they've got a trust account or if they've got, a representative payee appointed. And then the form is signed by the person and it's notarized. Each of the supporters also sign a consent form that acknowledges what they're doing. For ours, we have what's called a supporter appointment addendum so that they can each sign and have their own little copy. And we advocate for what's called proactive implementation. So that means having the person share this agreement with their regular providers, their doctor, their bank, so that they're aware, so that if a situation comes up, you don't have to immediately try to prove or show what you've been doing. Person grants decision-making authority to someone else. So with agency agreements, the person of powers of attorney, healthcare representative, representative payee, they can be written to address any number of circumstances. They are flexible, they're well regulated. Powers of attorneys are useful, but they differ significantly from supported decision-making in one major way. So in supported decision-making, the person retains that decision-making authority. They work with their supporter, but ultimately they make their own decision. With agency agreements, you appoint someone else and they make that decision on your behalf, right? These types of documents can generally be revoked by the person unless they are found to no longer have that capacity. They generally don't require court oversight or involvement. And they're also just a good practice to have in place as part of general advanced planning or future planning. For most of these, it's really wise to consult with an attorney to make sure that the document's complete. So next, let's talk about this red category right here, court-involved ways to assist with decision-making. So protective orders are ways for a court to ratify or approve a specific event without the need to appoint a guardian. So an example would be to help with the resolution of a settlement. If someone's in a car accident and they need to consent to the settlement that they've gotten from the insurance company, if they need to dispose of some property, if they need to, if they're in a coma and they need to be put into a nursing home to recover, that type of thing. One
Hey, Melissa, this is Sally. Your video's freezing. I don't know if you see it freezing on your end.
I do not. Is it still freezing?
Not this moment. It's kind of going in and out. So I just wanted to let you know.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have anything else running on my internet, so
Okay.
hopefully that was just a glitch.
A glitch. Okay. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Thank you.
Back to our regular scheduled programming.
Yes. So there are different types of guardianship, but there are considerable rights removed from the person as the guardian essentially stands in the legal shoes of that person. And it should be used when a person can no longer make or communicate decisions about their life or their property. Now, guardianship is absolutely a necessary tool. It absolutely is. But for those who don't need that level of intervention, those who are still able to make decisions themselves, there are those less restrictive ways that we've talked about, and those should be explored. So there are temporary guardianships where a court can grant decision-making authority to someone for a limited amount of time, 90 days with an extension for an additional 90 days if there's a good reason to do that. There's limited guardianships where the guardianships are generally over either just the person, meaning dealing with issues about where they live, their medical treatment, or over their estate. In some other states, you'll see this referred to as a conservatorship that deals with property and assets. So in the areas covered by the limited guardianship, the guardian makes all final decisions, but the person retains decision-making authority in all the other areas that are not covered by that limited guardianship. Full guardianship, on the other hand, means that all decisions, both over the person and the estate, are made by the guardian. And the thing to know about guardianship, and the reason why we advocate for less restrictive options first, is that they are extremely difficult to terminate or to get out of once they're put in place. There's only two ways to do it. One is by death of the person under guardianship. Death of a guardian does not remove the guardianship. Or you have to show by what's called clear and convincing evidence that the person has regained capacity. And that involves a lot of resources. It involves medical testimony or experts, and it can be very costly, very time consuming in order to do that, especially if the guardian is not also on board with the person terminating guardianship. And that's, again, why it's very important that we start with this least restrictive option. And I wanted to note briefly, there are a lot of other supports and decision-making models out there. And depending on the circumstances, there are ways to address concerns with finances, healthcare, through things like trust accounts. There's shared decision-making models or team-based decision-making models. There's all kinds of different ways to help structure. And I wanted to make sure that
Sally, again, you're once again frozen.
I noted those. So what to do? I've got my best internet. I am so sorry, guys.
That's okay. I'll give you a heads up when that's going on.
Okay, thank you. So there are all kinds of other options that are available as well. And the important thing is to speak with a professional who can help structure and guide and create what the person needs in an individualized way. And the other thing that I want to note is this concept of supported decision-making, of accommodating and supporting someone through that decision-making process can and should be used throughout any of these tools, any of these options, even used within that guardianship context. It can be a way for the person to gain skills in decision-making, which could lead to less need for a guardian over time, right? And I often get questions about the difference between supported decision-making and power of attorney and guardianship. And so I wanted to give a little example so that hopefully it becomes a little more clear. So this is Diana. Diana has schizophrenia. She lives alone. She's retired. She doesn't work anymore. Her adult son, Greg, kind of helps her around the house. He helps her if anything major comes up. So Diana slipped on some wet tile a few weeks ago and she's having really bad knee pain. So Greg goes with Diana to an orthopedic doctor's office to get it looked at. And the doctor says that Diana has, a tear in her ligament in her knee, and the treatment is either steroid shots, regular physical therapy, or surgery. Neither of these options sounds desirable to Diana, and it's causing her a great deal of anxiety because of her diagnosis, because of her age or her behavior in the office, the presence of her son with her. The doctor begins to question her ability to consent to a certain course of treatment. So under supported decision-making, if Diane had her son as a supporter, she would be able to use him in the way that she wants to help her make that decision. The process, which would be written down in her supported decision-making agreement, would allow the doctor to better understand how she made that decision and recognize her use of her son as a support as a valid way for her to demonstrate that medical informed consent. Under a power of attorney, if Diane had, previously executed a power of attorney document naming her son as attorney in fact for medical decisions, that doctor could look to Greg to make the decision on his mom's behalf in accordance with the language of the POA. If Diane didn't like the way that her son had made that decision, she could theoretically revoke that document and try to move forward making the decision herself or appoint someone else. Under guardianship, if Greg had been appointed guardian, the doctor would look exclusively to Greg to make that final decision about which treatment to do. So if you think about it, supported decision-making is I make the decisions myself using a supporter. Power of attorney is I appoint Greg to make the decisions for me. And guardianship is a court has appointed Greg to make decisions for me. So you can kind of see the differences there. So one of the biggest questions I hear about supported decision-making is what protections are in place to keep people from making a quote unquote bad decision or from being abused, neglected, or exploited. And so it's obviously a very valid concern. So I wanted to address that. There is a presumption of capacity that happens magically on a person's 18th birthday where the state says, good morning, congratulations, you are now an adult. Now, I don't know about you, but there is nothing magic that happens overnight where you wake up suddenly being a functional adult. I'm in my late 30s and I still don't feel like I always have a handle on things. So there's a presumption of capacity that's having dignity of risk. And unfortunately, people with disabilities are not often given that same dignity to make mistakes, or they may find themselves in a position where their ability to make mistakes is questioned for bad choices that many of us have also made. Here's an example, and recall that I'm at best an adequate driver. So in college, where great decisions are made, I decided to test fate by seeing how long I could go with my tank on E. It was hitting that E on the gas indicator. Didn't start out that way. I was late for class, didn't have time to stop, and I was in a hurry to get home, but it was like 2 or 3 days with that needle just pushing on E. And finally off campus on my way home, my car died. So what should have been a $20 fill up a few days ago turned into a $75 tow to a gas station, a $20 fill up, and a really embarrassing phone call to my parents as to why they were going to get a bill for $75. Now, after this incident, the state didn't take my license away. They didn't say that I can't drive anymore. They didn't put me under guardianship. They didn't restrict my ability to make decisions in other areas of my life. I made my stupid choice. I was able to learn from it and keep moving on. And that is presumption of capacity. That is dignity of risk. And how many of you, and again, I can't see hands, have heard or said the phrase, well, he's an adult, he can do what he wants. It's usually a he, isn't it, right? You'll notice that no one ever says that when someone is making a quote unquote good choice. It's not, Bill sure is saving a lot of money lately. Well, he's an adult, he can do what he wants. We really start to question someone's choices or their ability to make decisions, not based on their ability to make decisions, but rather when someone is making a decision that we don't agree with, right? People who make poor choices, people who smoke, people who don't take their medication as prescribed. No one says, I'm going to get guardianship over you because it's clear that you can't make decisions related to your health. That's silly. That's not how we treat the normal populace. But unfortunately for people with disabilities, they may be held to that higher standard. They don't get that dignity of risk that other people enjoy. They don't have their choices respected automatically by doctors or service providers. Presumption of capacity, dignity of risk is what allows us as adults to eat cake for dinner and to not take our antibiotics as prescribed, to not work out and eat healthy like we know we should, to not wear bike helmets. It's what allows us to rack up debt and date the wrong people and do all the things that make life, that teach us and that we learn from. And this burden of low expectations is that we assume that people with disabilities won't make a good decision or don't know how to make a decision. And so we don't even give them opportunities to do so. And then we're surprised when they make a quote unquote bad decision. And we have this knee-jerk reaction like, well, that didn't work. I guess they can never make a decision again. Or we translate that to a bad decision in one area means that they can't make decisions in any other area. It's not how we treat the general populace. It's not how we should treat people with disabilities. None of us would want our decision-making skills evaluated based on decisions that we made when we were 19, 20 years old. Everybody deserves that same presumption of capacity, that same dignity of risk that we all enjoy. And here's a secret. Guardianship is not an impenetrable shield. It is not a chastity belt. It is not a bank vault. It will not keep someone from eating cookies. It will not keep someone from not taking their medication. Bad things can and do happen. It's unfortunately part of the world that we live in. There is no guarantee of safety under any of the arrangements that I've talked about. But that's not a reason to limit the options that are available to people with disabilities for them to live their best lives. Instead, people should be empowered to use their voice, have their voice respected. So that means if abuse, neglect, or exploitation does happen, having their stories believed, and then holding the perpetrators accountable. It's much better to teach someone how to identify toxic, abusive, or exploitive behavior than to rely on someone always being around to do that for them, because eventually they either won't have a person in their corner, or worse yet, they'll have the wrong person. And lastly, I would note that there is mandatory reporting requirement for people who become aware of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So how to support options? How do we get started using something like supported decision-making or other options other than guardianship? So let's break down the process a little bit. For people who are currently under guardianship, who want to move to a less restrictive option, your first step needs to be to an attorney, because it's not going to happen without legal intervention. Indiana Disability Rights, Indiana Legal Services, other legal assistance may be available, but those are both my organization and Indiana Legal Services have programs to help people who are trying to get out from under a guardianship. For those who are not under guardianship, here are some ways how you can get started. So you can learn about more options. Our website has a lot of great resources available in both written and video formats. Assess the person's strengths and needs. There is a person-driven support worksheet that the person fills out themselves, where they can identify the areas where they think they need help and support. There's also the option for others in their life to complete that same information, and you can look for areas of agreement, areas of disagreement. You want to start thinking about potential supporters, who good people might be in that person's life. When we think about qualities of good supporters, what we're looking at, they should be an adult over the age of 18, looking at the person's stated trust or preference for them, especially when it comes to who's being used as a supporter. Things like the length of time the person has known them, the relationship. Are they likely to agree with or honor the person's choices, or are they going to constantly be pushing back? Are they available? Their sister who might be in college may be a great supporter, but if they are halfway across the country and not generally available by phone, they may not be the most appropriate supporter right now. Are they able to provide support in a stated way? If I say, I want my supporter to come with me to my medical appointments, just to be another voice to hear or to take notes for me or something like that, but I don't want them to talk. If the supporter that I pick can't keep their mouth shut in my doctor's appointments, then they're not supporting me in the stated way that I want. Suitability, we talk about include, either the person's expertise in a certain area, but also their character, criminal background, observed influence over the person. And then are there, secondary, additional, or backup people? Going back to those steps, you want to kind of go over those assessments with the person and start to develop a plan or decide on what options might be most appropriate. Writing out that plan using the supported decision-making template that we have on our website, consulting with an attorney who can help write a plan or draft some other necessary documents. And then if you're doing a supported decision-making, having those supporters sign the consents, sign the document in the presence of a notary for supported decision-making or a power of attorney. And then again, that proactive implementation, sharing with regular providers. So I wanted to talk briefly about Jamie Beck. So there is a great documentary on our website about Jamie's story. I see that we're running close to time, so I want to make sure that we leave time for questions. So I would encourage you to go to that website and watch Jamie's story, because she was the first person in Indiana to have her guardianship terminated in favor of using supported decision-making. Her story is very compelling, especially for those who are thinking, this may not be right for me. Believe me, her story is very incredible. So how can everybody fit into this discussion? Talking early and often about options that are available, pushing back if you hear people encouraging guardianship as the only option, especially if a less restrictive option might work. Encouraging opportunities for decision-making, building decision-making into curriculum, adding it to performance goals, encouraging the person to be an active participant in meetings, and then supporting the person's decisions, because again, nothing is more demoralizing than moving with a decision and then having it ignored or having it not implemented. And then finally, referring to resources to help them learn about what options are available. Indiana Disability Rights, we've created a website, and we're working on adding some additional great tools in both ASL and in Spanish. Please feel free to download whatever materials you need. If you are looking for something specific, please feel free to reach out to me. I have oodles and oodles of resources. Here are some other options that are available. And then finally, here is my contact information. You are welcome to email me or give me a call if you have any specific questions or if you're looking for specific resources. And with that, I will open it up for questions. But again, if we don't have time or if we run out, you can absolutely feel free to email me or give me a call through that way.
So thank you so much, Melissa. That was like wonderful information. And again, we will have the recording on our YouTube channel. So we do want to open up to anyone who has questions. And again, you can type those in. Just go to the bottom of your screen where you see the Q&A box. We had one question on who do I contact to get guardianship, or I would, and add to that, who would I contact in IDR is definitely a good resource on looking at again, more on an individual basis, looking at the differences on guardianship and supported decision-making.
Right. So Indiana Disability Rights, we do offer informally what's kind of called options counseling, where we will talk with the person and their family members or their support people about what options are available and help them through deciding how they want to structure their adult decision-making supports. When it comes to guardianship, Indiana Disability Rights does not, we do not help establish guardianships. There are other legal service organizations that will do that. Some courts do have packets available to fill out. But again, you want to make sure that you are looking at the least restrictive option possible. And in fact, there's been, along with the supported decision-making bill in 2018, there was a change to the guardianship code that required, as part of that guardianship petition, that you talk about whether least restrictive alternatives have been tried or if they would be more appropriate. So that is kind of a step in the process as well.
And I would add also, the ARC of Indiana and our family advocates are always available to talk with families on options. And I know in the time of COVID, probably going out and doing presentations isn't an option, but if organizations wanted to have a presentation, is IDR available for that?
Absolutely, yes. We regularly present. We can do them virtually, as you can see we're doing now. There's also other groups that are very interested in communicating this information, groups like the Centers for Independent Living, self-advocates, the ARC of Indiana. There's all kinds of groups that are also available to talk about this information.
That's wonderful. Well, I think we can close on this great comment that I would agree with, that says, awesome presentation sharing all the alternatives people with disabilities and their families can consider. So I think that's like the really important point, that there are options, and supported decision making is definitely a newer option and something to be considered. So thank you so much, Melissa, for your time. Thank you to all our participants who joined in today. And we will close the meeting with that. So thanks much.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.